October 29th, 2025, 15 nautical miles off the coast of Oahu, Hawaii. A Russian intelligence collection vessel, the Karelia, a Geopolitical-class signals intelligence ship, 3,500 tons, 146 crew, bristling with enough antenna arrays to give a satellite dish factory an inferiority complex, is holding a slow patrol pattern in international waters at 16 knots. That speed is worth pausing on. 16 knots. A modern container ship runs 24, a Coast Guard cutter runs 28. The Karelia was last substantially upgraded before most of her current crew members were born, and the upgrades were modest enough that Russian naval engineers would use the word modernization with a straight face, while the rest of the world quietly noted that new gray paint does not constitute a system refresh. The Karelia's captain was not concerned about speed. He was looking at his antenna suite, the MR231 surface search radar, the high-frequency communications intercept array, the specialized emission detection receivers, and thinking about Pearl Harbor's electromagnetic environment. U.S. Pacific Fleet Headquarters, submarine base, Indopacom Command infrastructure. 2 hours of active collection in these waters, and you go home having earned your operational budget for the quarter. His confidence was the particular variety that comes from having run this operation before, in other waters, against assets that did not notice or did not respond effectively. The Karelia had been doing signals intelligence patrols for 2 decades. The playbook was established. The Americans would log the contact, issue a polite radio challenge, and the ship would collect for 6 hours before turning north. What the Karelia's captain did not know was that the response had already been sequenced before he reached the 15 nautical mile mark, and that the HC-130J Super Hercules climbing out of Barbers Point airfield 18 minutes after he was flagged was not a patrol aircraft in any sense that would have been familiar from his previous experience of American counter-surveillance operations. The HC-130J is not glamorous. It was not designed to be. It is a turboprop maritime patrol and reconnaissance platform that has been flying in various configurations since the Eisenhower administration, which is precisely why its capabilities relative to its appearance represent such a consistent source of surprise for adversary observers. The AN/AAS-52 multispectral targeting system mounted beneath its fuselage is a gyroscopically stabilized optical and infrared sensor pod. A camera architecture so precisely stabilized against the aircraft's own vibration and movement that the video feed it produces shows no detectable motion despite the 4 turboprop engines running continuously overhead. The resolution is not measured in readable license plates at a mile. It is measured in the ability to read maintenance stenciling on a ship's antenna housings from an altitude where the aircraft appears to the naked eye as a distant speck with an engine sound. The Hercules established a surveillance orbit 2,000 feet above the Karelia within 25 minutes of being airborne. From the Russian ship's deck, it was unremarkable background noise. From the Hercules, the Karelia was being mapped in complete detail. Every antenna, every topside crew rotation, every piece of deck equipment, while the data stream fed back to Indopacom in real time. The Karelia was not watching Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was watching the Karelia build a catalog of itself. Every collection operation the Karelia's crew ran over the next several hours would be recorded, analyzed, and added to that catalog. This was not counter-surveillance in the defensive sense. It was an intelligence audit conducted against a subject that had no idea it was the subject. Here is what made the next phase so one-sided, it functions as a case study rather than a tactical engagement. When the Karelia activated its MR231 surface search radar, a broad pulse emission designed to map surface contacts in the surrounding area, the HC-130 electronic intelligence suite did not simply detect a radar signal. It detected a specific radar. The MR231 has been in operational service long enough that its emission characteristics, pulse width, repetition frequency, scan rate, frequency band, specific modulation patterns are fully documented in every Western electronic warfare database maintained since the Cold War. The Hercules' systems cross-referenced the intercept against the stored profile in under 2 seconds and confirmed the match. The collection was not a detection event. It was a library update. The Karelia then activated its high-frequency communications intercept array, sweeping across naval and maritime communication bands. The array is a capable system for its generation. It is also an emitter. To function, it broadcasts low-level calibration signals that characterize its own sensitivity envelope. Those calibration emissions were logged. The encryption architecture the ship's communication systems use to protect its own transmissions was characterized as outdated against current Western cryptographic standards. Not broken in real time, but cataloged for context. The third activation was the one the Karelia's crew likely considered their most sensitive asset, a specialized receiver array designed to detect the low observable electronic signatures associated with stealth aircraft operations. The sensitivity required for that detection task creates an engineering constraint. To operate at the required threshold, the system must broadcast a narrow calibration pulse that verifies its own receiver state. That pulse is unique to the system architecture, a fingerprint that identifies not just the presence of the system, but its current operational parameters. The HC-130 caught it in under a minute. In 3 separate activations across the patrol, the Karelia had not collected meaningful intelligence on Pearl Harbor's operational electronic environment. It had provided the American surveillance system with a complete characterization of its own emission architecture, the radar's frequency parameters, the communications intercept array's operational profile, and the sensitivity specifications of its most protected collection system, all logged, time-stamped, and forwarded to Indopacom before the Karelia's crew broke for their evening meal. If you were the Karelia's captain and understood what was happening, that every system you activated was being characterized rather than concealing its own presence, at what point would you shut everything down and turn north? Or does the mission requirement demand you collect regardless of the counter-surveillance environment? Leave your read below. The USCGC William Hart, a Sentinel-class fast response cutter, 154 feet, twin MTU diesels through water jets, 28-knot maximum speed, had been underway from Honolulu before the HC-130 completed its first orbit. It reached position within the hour and executed a course cut that placed it 500 yards off the Karelia's port beam without a radio call or warning signal. Just ship handling. A tight turn the Karelia's hull geometry and 16-knot maximum speed made impossible to replicate, followed by a settled escort position that communicated everything the Hart's crew needed to communicate. The Karelia could not outrun the Hart. The speed differential was 12 knots, enough that any evasion attempt would have resulted in the cutter repositioning ahead of the Russian ship within minutes. The maneuverability differential was wider. The Hart's waterjet propulsion allows directional changes that a conventional propeller and rudder hull at 3,500 tons cannot match. The Karelia's captain had been placed in a position where his tactical options reduced to 2. Continue the patrol under direct observation or turn north early. He continued the patrol. The Hart maintained its 500-yard escort position. The HC-130 maintained its orbit overhead. The collection continued, not collection by the Karelia, but collection of the Karelia, for the remaining operational hours before the Russian vessel's timeline expired and she turned toward home. The departure was not dramatic. No evasive maneuver, no burst transmission indicating a mission success assessment. Just a large, slow vessel altering course to the north while the Hart held its position and the HC-130 logged the final hours of the contact. Now run the exchange ratio, Russia's operational investment, a 10,000-mile round-trip deployment for 146 crew members, weeks of fuel consumption through aging engines, months of maintenance and operational costs to keep the ship seaworthy. Against that investment, the Karelia returned to port having provided the United States a complete electronic characterization of her own systems, having collected no usable intelligence on Pearl Harbor's operational environment that was not already available through other means, and having demonstrated to every Pacific ally who tracked the intercept that Russian signals intelligence doctrine had not materially advanced since the platforms it relies on were designed. American operational investment, HC-130J, flight hours at standard operating cost, Coast Guard cutter fuel, and crew time for a patrol the William Hart would have run in the area regardless. Total direct cost, well under $100,000 against several $100,000 in Russian operational expenditure to get the Karelia to that position. The return on the American side, a current, operationally validated electronic baseline on the Karelia's complete signals intelligence architecture, documented under live collection conditions, shareable with allied intelligence services, and usable to inform electronic warfare planning against the entire Steregushchiy-class. The return on the Russian side, nothing the mission was tasked to collect. There is a geopolitical dimension to this encounter that extends well beyond the direct intelligence exchange. The Pacific in late 2025 was not a stable environment. Chinese naval activity in the South China Sea had been escalating. North Korean missile testing was running at a pace that made routine a meaningful operational category. Japan, Australia, South Korea, and the Philippines were all watching American response posture in the region with the specific interest of allies calibrating their own positioning against a deteriorating security environment. The Karelia's deployment into the Hawaiian operating area was a presence signal, a message to regional audiences that Russia maintained the capability and will to operate at extended range adjacent to American military infrastructure. The intention was to project relevance at a moment when Russia's conventional naval capacity was being stretched by commitments elsewhere and its economic headroom for naval investment was constrained by 3 years of sanctions pressure. The message that landed was the inverse. American counter-surveillance of the Karelia was not conducted by a destroyer task group or a carrier air wing. It was conducted by a single maritime patrol aircraft that diverted from its standard mission for a few hours, and a Coast Guard cutter whose primary peacetime function is fisheries enforcement and maritime law. The two assets between them were sufficient to shadow, characterize, and effectively negate the intelligence collection objectives of a purpose-built signals intelligence vessel that had traveled 5,000 miles to operate in the area. For defense ministries in Tokyo, Canberra, Manila, and Seoul, the takeaway was not that Russia had demonstrated reach. It was that the American surveillance architecture is dense enough to counter an extended-range Russian intelligence collection operation with assets that represent a small fraction of the force the United States maintains in the Pacific. The Karelia inadvertently produced evidence of American information dominance in the Pacific operating environment, evidence delivered to every regional observer at Russia's expense. Russian state media covered the return as a successful intelligence patrol. Inside the Naval Intelligence Directorate that planned and assessed the mission, the actual result was considerably less comfortable to brief up the chain. The structural question the Karelia incident leaves open is the one that determines whether the next iteration goes differently. The fundamental problem with Steregushchiy-class signals intelligence architecture is generational. The systems are old enough that their emission characteristics are fully documented in adversary databases, and the upgrade path is constrained by an industrial base that has been under sustained economic pressure. A next-generation Russian signals intelligence platform, built with current low observable emission standards and modern encryption, would not hand over its electronic fingerprint in 3 activations to an aircraft flying overhead. The question is how long it takes to field that platform and what the collection environment looks like during the development gap, and whether, given the current constraints on Russian naval investment, that platform gets funded before the Steregushchiy-class reaches the end of its operational life entirely. Leave your analysis in the comments.